Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. I'm delighted that Paul Senn has agreed to do this presentation on the intersection between spirituality and mental health and psychotherapy. He's been working on that for a long time, but I'm going to have him talk about that. So the format is Paul will be making a presentation. Please use pen and paper to keep track of all the things that you would like to talk about. There'll be plenty of opportunity afterwards to ask questions, to make comments. So with that, over to Paul. Paul.
All right. Thank you so much, Srikant. What a privilege. While you're still here, I want to say thank you so much because Srikant and I have gone back and forth in a dialogue on this subject for a year or two now. And I really needed all that time to figure out what to say to you people. So I'm very glad to be here and on this topic. So I'm going to share my screen and I've got basically a slideshow going here. Can everyone see that okay? Does it say wisdom teachings? Good,
Yes.
you're getting the thumbs up. And this talk evolved. It's very personal. It's going to start on a personal note and end on a personal note. It's not trying to make claims about what others might think of the basic teachings I'm going to talk about, nor actually I'm a practicing mental health counselor, but I don't exactly talk this way in my practice, but I use it in my personal life all the time. So I'm going to get into what I mean by that. So, and I can do that most easily by way of my introduction with first slide here. So, you know what this is, folks? This is the sanctuary quilt. And the sanctuary quilt is in a Unitarian church in Littleton, Mass. And the reason I put it up is personal in that, although I'm not a member of this church, I was raised in the Unitarian tradition. So those of you who know that tradition know that it tries to, as you can see from these symbols, basically give respect and like cover everything. And so being raised in that manner, and also having that sort of seeker's mentality that I think a lot of the people in this meetup do have. And thank you so much. Those of you who are appeared are really significant people who have so much to contribute and know more about these subjects than I do. And I will love your feedback. So all is fair game. But in my case, being a seeker and always asking the existential questions, you might say looking for a theory of everything, I found that with the Unitarian Church, not a general criticism, but personally, I kind of came up with nothing. So I dabbled into these in more depth because I wasn't getting enough depth by just accepting every possible teaching. And that led me through many paths, ending in being a mental health counselor after some other professions. I majored in philosophy. I was in technology. I studied other things. And this career I have now is kind of a chance to really look more deeply into this question of how the wisdom teachings and the teachings of Carl Jung relate to our lives. So to get into it, we're going to spend about 15 minutes on a rapid lightning history of one of the threads of psychotherapeutic traditions so that I can make points around that tradition. And for that reason, I'm going to go to this next slide. So this is a common approach to what happened in mental health over the 20th century and the 21st century, with Freud and Jung as these people at the top, and then these three branches that came out of that. Behaviorism, Skinner, operant conditioning, Pavlov, humanistic psychology, and then psychoanalysis, the work directly in the Freudian tradition, and analytical psychology, the work in the Jungian tradition. Now, I'm going to focus on the thread that comes down from humanistic psychology for a couple reasons. One is that's what I know about. That's more of what I was trained in, is that tradition, going down through cognitive behavioral, and I'll talk about the third wave. And secondly, it's very important, even if you don't agree with how much weight it carries, it is what is taught It is what is used in the mental health clinics of America. It is what is most widely studied. I'm taking nothing away from psychoanalysis or analytical psychology, which have their own heritage and are alive and well, but the one that is being administered to the most human beings right now is in this next tradition. And it's important to talk about, and it's what I use every day. So in this next slide, I just added the wisdom teachings. So you'll see the thread I'm going to take. I'm going to talk about how they influenced. What do I mean by wisdom teachings? You guys know, because 52 Living Ideas is all over that. So Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, the Holy Bible, to name just a few. And I want to talk about the way that these filter down through the minds of especially Jung, and also the direct influence these had. And I'm going to give specific examples. And we're starting with, sorry, I'm going too fast here. So we're going to go down this chain: humanistic psychology to cognitive behavioral therapy to the third wave therapies, and relate them, my opinion, to both Jung and the traditions of the wisdom teachings. And they have a very applicable, like not just theoretical view that I'm going to apply here. So if we start by looking at humanistic psychology, I'm going to read the bottom, which is sort of how humanistic psychology developed as what they called the third force after behaviorism and the psychoanalysis. And this quote at the bottom from our readings in humanistic psychology says, behaviorism and psychoanalysis appear to have made great contributions, but neither singly nor together have they covered the almost limitless scope of human behavior, relationships, and possibility. Perhaps their greatest limitation has been the inadequacy of their approach to positive human potentialities and the maximal realization of those. So they had this charter with some of the elements at the bottom listed. I mean, at the top, the sort of charter of humanistic psychology: human beings as humans supersede the sum of their parts. They cannot be reduced to components. They have their existence in a uniquely human context as well as a cosmic ecology. And human beings are aware of being aware. They're conscious. And that consciousness includes an awareness of oneself in the context of other people. And finally, because of this thread of determinism that was been going around in the world, in some respects, they have this part of the charter that human beings have some choice, responsibility, and seek meaning, value, and creativity. So right there, you see a sort of a loftiness that you don't find if you go into Freud too much or the behaviorists too much. I'm not an expert in those. So those of you who are experts, chime in afterwards and disagree with me if you will. This is the thread I'm going to go down. So if I go to the next, let's start down the humanistic thread, and we start with Carl Rogers. And he had this view that you don't sit in sort of an ivory tower and lecture your client, but you're right there with him with unconditional positive regard. And that's a huge part of what he was doing, was relating to people on their level with a high degree of listening and empathy and compassion. And through that, he believed you could get at the actualizing tendency in everyone toward what Maslow talked about as self-actualization, but it's important to just think of it as actualization. And here I want to get into the first comparison or note of similarity with Freud, with Jung, by playing a clip of this guy, Brian Thorne. And in the 1980s, this person-centered psychologist Brian Thorne wrote an article called The Two Carls that actually drew the similarities between Jung and Rogers. And then in 2014, he was interviewed. And he, better than I, can talk about this. So I'm going to play that about 3 minutes of the clip of that interview. By the way, I'll put my email on the end of this, and you can send me requests if you want to have these, these ideas that I'm talking about sent to you. Hold on one second. I'm needing to get the right screen up here, and I'm going to do that momentarily. Hold on. Sorry. Close that. And go to Chrome. And here is the window I want to have up. Now I'm going to exit full screen. I'm going to go back to Zoom. Sorry, I'm walking myself through the steps here and pressing this. Okay. I'm going to stop this once more to make sure I clicked share sound, which I did. Okay. Share. And let's hear about 3 minutes of this. So this is Andrew Samuels in about 2014, another PhD psychologist, psychiatrist involved, especially in Jung, interviewing Brian Thorne.
Certainly in the person-centered community anyway, that Jung, in contradistinction, I think, to Freud, had an essentially, if you like, hopeful and optimistic view of the human person.
Yes.
He didn't see the unconscious as simply the ragbag. Mm-hmm. He saw it as the resource for immense creativity.
Would you say that the self-actualizing tendency and the drive to individuation are different terms for much the same thing?
Yes, I think I've got to be a bit careful about the notion of self-actualization with Rogers, but perhaps we'll come back to that in a second. Yes, I think that the whole notion that the human person is, if you like, almost from the day of birth in the process of becoming, that there is a journey to be gone upon, that actually is really, if you like, similar terrain for both of these people. Yes. And amongst the person-centered community, I think there is a recognition again that Jung's notion that there is, if you like, a hopefulness about the human journey, that what actually impedes is something that can be, if you like, remedied. And in the same way, Rogers, in his understanding of the human personality, saw that it was in fact impediments to growth, which therapy could actually address and release the person from those impediments so that they could go forward to become the person that they had it truly within them to become. And I think there's a great deal of similarity between the two, and I think that is more recognised in the person-centred world. It's also the case that Rogers himself, from time to time, although he certainly wasn't very well acquainted with Jung or Jungian psychology, nonetheless did actually make reference to Jung.
Okay, I will stop it there. You can see the point I'm making that I want to stress is this view of what a person is and the potentiality of a person is shared with Jung's legacy, and this idea of individuation and self-actualization, this journey that we're on, is also shared. So speaking of sharing, I'm going to get back to the presentation now. So moving in our rapid lightning tour of humanistic psychology, we're going now to cognitive behavioral therapy, Aaron Beck, and rational emotive behavior therapy, Ellis. And if Joe was on this call, Joe would want me to mention that Albert Ellis basically quoted the Stoics as part of his inspiration. And when interviewed and asked to talk about Rogers, what Aaron Beck said is, this is a joke, so take it as a joke, but important. The problem with the non-directive approach is it's non-directive. So there was a general criticism that Carl Rogers was just that type of therapy, Rogerian therapy. You just sort of smiled and looked at the person And although I don't agree with this, and you will see that his methods were more important and more subtle than that criticism implies, but that Beck was saying we need to do something more than that to stimulate real change. And so he came up with this model. I wish I could get out of this. There we go. And I'll read his definition of what he did. Cognitive therapy seeks to alleviate psychological stress by correcting faulty conceptions and self-signals. By correcting erroneous beliefs, we can lower excessive reactions. So in order to make that happen, he, oops, how did I get back out of slideshow mode? I don't really know. Hold on. Am I in the right window that I'm sharing here? Hold on. I'm going to reshare for just a moment because I seem to be not in slideshow mode. I'll go back to slideshow mode if I have to. I guess I do. Here's the model. Okay, can you see this model of core beliefs, thoughts, feelings, and actions? Okay,
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah, so this is the processing model that's at the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy, that by looking at our thought errors, we can change feelings and actions. Actually, all the arrows here are bidirectional. And also noticing, so all of these things affect one another. And also noticing that we have these core beliefs that we may not be conscious of that lead to automatic thoughts. And Beck developed techniques for self-examination to get people to notice these, which are the examples of what he called cognitive distortions: catastrophizing, making a big deal out of nothing, magnification, minimization, overgeneralization, personalization, meaning all this is my fault, I did it all. And when really there's many reasons, jumping to conclusions, they're self-explanatory to some extent. Mind reading, so you just assume you know what someone else is thinking. Emotional reasoning, so you're reasoning from an emotion rather than from rationality. Disqualifying the positive, I think it's an important one. That's the person who wins a medal, but then they immediately point to all the things that weren't good about what they did. Should statements, big judgments that get in the way of clear thinking, and then black and white, all or nothing thinking. So there's a way of looking at this that says that what was going on with Beck's addition, so Carl Rogers was like doing the namaste, the acknowledgement of this almost divinity in every person. And Aaron Beck started lifting the veil of illusion, essentially, because all these distortions are a source of illusion. And you can see I'm using kind of wisdom teaching terminology to frame that. And I'm going to share, to prove that I'm not completely making this up, I'm going to share another clip here because Aaron Beck pursued this whole angle, and I'll show you how he did in it by bringing up the correct window. Where's the Dalai Lama? Hold on. Not finding it, but I will in just a minute. Here it is. Okay. Now I've got the window. Now I've got to share it. Okay. So let's listen to a bit. You'll probably recognize that gentleman.
Yeah,
With
very
Aaron
wise.
Beck.
Wise.
With Aaron
I think
Beck.
right method. That we call exactly analytical meditation.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I was brought together with the Dalai Lama because a number of people recognized that Buddhism and cognitive therapy have many features in common. We both believe in looking at the mind. We both are introspective. We both look at negative thoughts, and we both believe that negative thinking can be modified. The Buddhist tradition will modify the negative thinking through a variety of forms of meditation, compassionate meditation, so on. Cognitive therapy does it through getting people to look at their automatic thoughts, somewhat similar to Buddhism. Buddhism gets people to look at their negative thoughts and to just let them flow out. Cognitive therapy looks at the negative thoughts and then tries to correct them, tries to test them scientifically. So
that's the gist of that particular point. So you can see I'm building essentially a thread here of continuity with the wisdom teachings. I want to go back to do the right share, going back to the presentation. Should be it. Okay. Are you seeing the quote from Baron Beck again?
We are. You're not in presentation mode, but we're seeing the notes.
Oh, I'll go back. I don't know why it keeps.
There you go. You got
Thanks
it.
for letting me know. Okay, can we keep going? Yep. I should be in presentation mode now.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so there was the clip of Aaron Beck with the Dalai Lama, and the point I'm making about that is the addition of self-examination on the path to finding oneself that Beck and Ellis and others added to the equation. So the first wave we can call the humanistic wave of, the person-centered of Carl Rogers, building on that, not eliminating it, also acknowledging its truth, but adding to it is this attempt to lift the veil. And that now we're going to get into the final part I'm going to talk about. It's still only the beginning of a long process, but is Marshall Linehan dialectical behavior therapy in the third wave. And I'm introducing that with a quote from Marshall Linehan. I looked for a video of her, but it's not as convincing. She doesn't present herself as well as I'd like. She's so brilliant. But so I'm just going to read the quote. You can't think yourself into new ways of acting. You can only act yourself into new ways of thinking. So what does that mean? So Marshall Linehan had a breakdown, like Rogers also did, by the way, and like Jung did. When she was a very young woman, she was hospitalized, she was suicidal, she was cutting. But she felt after she emerged from the hospitalization with medication and other techniques that she wasn't really helped. And she went on her own journey that included a journey east into Zen Buddhism and other things to try to look for a better way that essentially incorporated that she thought we still weren't taking the whole person and the whole human being experience of being human into account, even with the humanistic additions. And she developed a system that has these 4 modules. And I like this diagram because it gives them names, labels above just the technical name. So she actually thought there was a dialectic, meaning 2 poles that need to be sort of reconciled, that one really needs to hold at the same time. One is the acceptance and one is change. And in order to, she believed that wellness is a skill you can practice. And so she developed skills on the acceptance side. They're the distress tolerance skills. And the goal there is that left circle, reduce suffering, and mindfulness skills. When we're right into the world, again, of meditation and really intense focus and a lot of variations on that to find inner strength, as she put it. And then in order to facilitate change, it involves the outside world and involves people. So building meaningful relationships, that's interpersonal affective skills. And then the emotions are constant challenges to change, to coping with change. So create daily peace. And then this person added maintain effective outcomes, which is what she called middle path skills, which Marshall Linehan talks about, where once you're kind of there, there's sort of a maintenance by moderation, techniques of moderation that are all skills. And when I mean skills, I mean skills. I mean this. I mean a skills training with, I think, over 250 skills that a person just does on a daily basis, implying that this technique of getting beyond one's hang-ups, one's emotional blocks, the things that prevent transcendence, that prevent actualization, can be taught. And so to illustrate the combination of all of this, I'm going to end my lightning tour with what I call a day in the life of a person. And I'm going to be interested in your thoughts about this. I just need to do one thing here to pull up my own notes. Yeah. I don't have a slide about this. I'm just going to talk through it from some notes I have. And here we go. So our person we're naming Tamara. And let's say that Tamara has a really big job, high responsibility. So her days are stressful and very busy. She's got a home life that's big too. So Tamara wakes up in the morning, and what does she do first? She does a gratitude practice, which is a skill she was trained in. And she, in this case, uses the hierarchy of gratitude, which is sort of a map against the hierarchy of needs, and notes that you can be grateful for really big things that cross all of human endeavors, or something as small as your cat, for instance. But in this case, she's grateful. She decides to focus on a tree that's outside her work at the courtyard that brings her some peace when she's going through a stressful day. And she just takes a minute while she's still lying in bed to just envision the tree, imagine it with all five senses, and feel this strong sense of thankfulness and gratitude for it. So then she learns some grounding exercises involving getting really centered in her body. She stands up, she feels her feet on the floor and does sort of a body scan, some stretching, noticing mindfully all of her body sensations. And at the breakfast table, she knows she has a tendency to ruminate, starting to think about the day. So she has an apple, and she's learned a mindful eating practice that allows her to just focus with all five senses on the apple. Okay, now she's off to work. She's got some scenarios in mind at work that are raising anxiety in her. There's one particular person at work who just drives her nuts. Let's call him Ronald. And he just seems to get on her nerves, push her buttons every time she sees him. And he's smart and on the management team, and she has to deal with him every day. He has his supporters, and yet he pushes her buttons. So she does what she learned about in her skills training, a cope ahead plan, where she envisions a scenario that's going to happen when she gets into work, and then methods she has learned of basically emotion regulation to handle the things that are going to come up. And she remembers a loving kindness meditation that she learned as part of actually a distress tolerance course that allows a person to try to send kindness and imagine positive qualities of someone they're having trouble with. And then she gets to work with making all these efforts. She opens her emails, and there's like 400 of them. And she just getting a wave of anxiety about that. And she's learned a technique called reframing, where she looks at each email. She tries to adopt a stance where each email is an opportunity instead of being this anxiety producing little nugget. And that brings her anxiety down a bit. Then she gets into the morning meeting, and there's Ronald looking at her with a smirk on his face, sort of like making a comment like, hey, did you get out of the wrong side of bed? She's immediately feels this wave of irritation and even repulsion as she sees him. And she attempts to use the skills she thought about in the Copahead plan, and they weren't quite working. And she uses one called opposite emotion, where you consciously bring forth the opposite emotion of what you are feeling. That doesn't work either. So she goes to acceptance mode, and she moves to something called urge surfing, where she considers this wave of repulsion, exactly that, to be a wave that she's going to accept, she's going to acknowledge, but she knows unless she clings to it, it's just going to pass through her. And so that allows her to keep a little sanity, but it's still something she knows she needs to work on. So at lunch, she goes out to her tree. She calls it her tree, and she just sits, and she puts everything else aside and focuses on it. And maybe because of the intensity of the day and the gratitude practice, she finds herself connecting so deeply with this tree and her meditation on it that the boundaries between her and the tree are disappearing. And that comes from the work of doing this practice every morning that has led her into deeper and deeper places that allow her to basically get outside of herself. So she comes refreshed into the afternoon. There's a meeting of many different people that afternoon about a big policy decision. Are they going to replace a system or enhance an existing system? And she's in a decision-making position. And she has her own opinions, but she knows that the interpersonal connection with the team is so important and sort of, in a way, trumps everything. And she's able to invoke her skills of looking at dialectics to notice and think of the fact that each group in that room have grains of truth, and you can hold them at the same time, even though the views seem opposing. And she approaches the whole meeting that way. And those who know that she doesn't like their point of view are particularly impressed of how closely she listens to them and how much she tries to dig out the truth in what they're saying. So they come out of the meeting with a compromise where they're going to have checkpoints along the way, for instance, of rolling out this new system. And she feels good about that. And the day's over, but almost. She's sitting in the lobby and she sees Ronald, and she's just catching him. He doesn't notice she's looking at him. She catches him in a moment where he's looking out at the window, and she sees him regarding the same tree that she loves. And suddenly she can feel his humanity, which is what she has been training herself to do with the loving kindness meditation. And it's sort of working all of a sudden. And she's able to regard him compassionately, without judgment, and with this new focus. And when she's sitting there quietly, something wells up in her. The fact that there's the strong resemblance between his profile and a character she remembers in a story she was told as a child. And she suddenly connects the dots and the distortions, and she files this in her mind for future consideration. And it's like she uncovered a piece of her unconscious through all these skills. And she's able to then know there's something she can continue to work on moving forward. And she goes home, and she has recognized also through her principles that she's been taught that you need to involve the whole mind, the left and right hemispheres, and self-soothing actions such as that involve things that aren't purely rational are important. And from that point of view, she's able to finish her day by painting. And so there is the story. So now I'm going to go back to what I'm getting at with that story. And Are you seeing the screen share again?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Not yet. Why is that? Share. Hold on. I'm sorry, I wish I was more skilled at this. Google Slides are a little different than PowerPoint or something, but here I am. Now, can you see it?
Yeah, it says day in the life of tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'm just listed here. I invite you to think of all these terms: gratitude, acceptance, tolerance, forgiveness, the idea of a wise center, humility, restraint, the search for truth and self-mastery, transcendence, appreciation of nature, embracing of opposites, self-awareness, loving kindness, open dialogue, contemplation, empathy, moderation, respect, connection. And I invite you to consider the difference between her behavior that day and what a person deep into the practices that are taught in the wisdom teachings might do, or how they might act. Now, we can say that they came from different sort of sources, but the end result might be, I invite you to consider the fact that might be similar actions. And so to summarize, the spiritual elements in behavioral health treatment, the first wave, I'm just naming them with spiritual terms now. Maslow and Rogers, namaste. The Christians, not all Christians like namaste, by the way, because it sounds like you're worshiping another person, but man in God's image is straight from the Christian tradition. The second wave, lifting the veil of illusion through close self-examination, Ellis and Beck. The third wave, Linehan, I mentioned John Kabat-Zinn there too. Acceptance and surrender. Notice how she accepted her wave of emotion. That's sort of an addition to the third wave, paired with skills to enable transformation that go beyond the cognitive. This integration of mindfulness into Western therapies that are taught, that's taught in these mental health clinics across the West is actually quite remarkable. But we don't notice it being remarkable. Why not? Because many people think of the therapies I just talked about as, oh, that's someone who has borderline personality disorder. That's someone who's really depressed at work. That's someone who has problems, you know, and that's because the medical model, for various reasons, meaning the disease model, the illness model, is how we've been trained to think about what it means to go into a clinic. I'm sick and have behavioral health treatment. And that's why the elements that I'm talking about aren't talked about very much or noticed. So, I mean, I hope you're making notes and you'll violently disagree with me or agree with me. I'm going to end the last few minutes before I open for discussion, probably 10 minutes, with a couple things. First of all, although I don't bring these ideas forward in my practice as a mental health clinician at one of these clinics where I go in every day, I'm not talking this way unless the person invites it, in which case I will. But nevertheless, these techniques are at work. It doesn't matter if you use those spiritual terms or not. And secondly, although I don't apply it in my work directly unless there's a really good match and the person basically requests it, I apply it all the time, day and night, like those skills that I walked through. That's how I think about operating in the world. And my partner in life, Tanya, who's on this call, knows that we work together on applying. She's also a therapist. So you might think we would drive each other crazy, but no, we look at applying these skills to our own journey. So I do that very, very seriously. So there's a very personal answer to my own question when I was back looking for a theory of everything, and I'm going to say a little more about that with a model I have developed for how to think about all this. And in doing the model, I wanted to put in a nutshell sort of the frame of mind I'm sort of promoting here. And my mind went to Buckminster Fuller. And so I put a tetrahedron on paper, and it bore some fruit to do this. So here's a shout out to not only Buckminster Fuller, but the people in this room and out of this room who talked through how he thinks in meetups. Because it's through these meetups, I got exposure to him, as well as we're getting a lot of training in the wisdom teachings, such as the Tao Te Ching and the NLX meetups that are going on right now. But so at the top, I decided what are the vertices of a tetrahedron I can put together that outline the space I'm trying to talk about. So let's put wisdom teachings at 1. And then let's add theory, modern theory and modern practice. So the wisdom teachings are this body of knowledge, and you can think of Jung's body of work there too. And then there's now. There's then, where there's all that, and then there's now. And there's not only theories, but there's the practices, as I've talked a lot about, that came out of that. Okay, so just the triangle of those three. The good thing about the tetrahedron is there's questions that it stimulates that are the right questions if you make the right mapping, in my opinion. So each edge is a set of questions. What are the practices that came from modern theory? How did the wisdom teachings influence both modern theory and practice? Every point is connected to every other point. Just some examples there. We're going to keep going, because as I was thinking about how these modern theories are used and applied and thought about, as I was thinking about how they were thought about, I realized that there's another important element, which is how do we validate? What is our validation method? That's another vertex. What is our way of deciding whether something's true or not? And that opened up a lot of doors in my mind, because there's a huge emphasis now on, and why is cognitive behavioral therapy so much momentum now? Because there's over 2,000 studies, including hundreds of randomized control trials, like the gold standard of how you do science. It again came out of drug testing and medicine with the control group, and then the group you're giving it to, and then the measurement and all of that. And that's how we're validating. Not all of us agree that that's how we should be validating, but that is, let me put it this way, that's what the insurance companies are paying for, is that kind of evidence-based practice. But if you link that up to the wisdom teachings, it asks the questions, what is the validation using these methods we might be applying to the wisdom teachings? And what were the validation methods, if you roll this tetrahedron back 1,000 years, that they were applying? So these are the questions this tetrahedron brings to mind, in my opinion. So I'm going to go with, I also added, this is an attempt to get the centroid, that middle point. It should be equidistant between all the, but it's not in this picture. I apologize for that, but consider it to be equidistant. Well, it could be, but it should be sort of right in the middle. But anyway, notice the interconnection of every point with every point in the addition of that centroid. And in the centroid, I put history, because, oops, I lost my screen. I think you can still see it though. Because, can you still see it?
Yeah, you come out of presentation mode, but we can still see it.
Oh, I see. By clicking away, I get out of
That's it.
presentation.
You're back in.
Yeah, okay. So I know it's a little cut off, but I can't seem to fix that right now. But you know, wisdom teachings is at the top, and I want to note the bidirectionality. I put a few arrows in, but there should be arrows everywhere. So this is one of the key points, is that we can look, we have the benefit that Lao Tzu and the writers of the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita and even the Christian scriptures did not have. We have the benefit of looking at everything that's transpired in the thousands of years since then. And we have the benefit of considering the application of a new method of validation. And so this makes the wisdom teachings or Jung's teaching come alive. They come alive because they're never dead. They aren't this static piece of knowledge that was developed back then. But by pushing these arrows this other direction, we can learn so much. And it's a whole different mindset than going, well, you either believe you're a Christian or a Hindu or you believe some modern theories of determinism or, materialism. No, you look at these teachings and you see how they're informed by new theories. They're not necessarily outmoded, and it's a living, and this is a mindset that I want to do a shout out to. Last slide here. An important figure we've talked about in these meetups. So I called this, just to give it a name, the wisdom in motion model. And the idea is a body of knowledge can be viewed not as static, but as a living system. And that if we do that, we enable the flow of information from contemporary theory and practice back to the source material in all directions, but you could go the other way too, but that's the obvious way, so that it continues to evolve. And this moves us from angry science, to this, which I give Daniel Kahneman, I think he just passed away, which is why I wanted to honor him a bit. And he coined the term angry science, I believe, rebelling against it. And it moves us from angry science to a collaboration between past and present that I don't think is very much out there. So we have these funny funnels and tunnels of systematic belief in what a given system or therapy can do, and it's separate from all these other things. And this is a way to integrate them all. I think I'm done and stayed pretty close to my hopeful time. And I would now absolutely love it. I guess is Srikant down again? Or?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
good. Okay. So Srikant, you can moderate. And I'm really looking forward to all forms of criticism. Anything you want to say will be hugely helpful. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. Folks, this is the time to ask questions, to make comments. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom in order to speak. Don't be shy. Go ahead. Okay, we have DLJ. DLJ, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Paul for taking us on that journey there. I'm intrigued as what he thinks might, he's talking about psychotherapy, right? Obviously, quite a lot, aren't you, Paul? And I want to pick your brains as to the relationship between that versus psychology, in other words, study of the mind itself, and how those two might be interrelated.
Wow. I knew you would have great questions, DLJ. Thank you. I think it's near and dear to my heart because of both my own questions in my mind of whether I should study quote unquote psychology or stay in the realm I'm in. And a lot of it, DLJ, I think, is the difference between theory and practice. So the psychologists, the PhD psychologists who do the research that at least I know, not all of them, but a big emphasis is on research about the human mind, is about doing controlled tests to understand if we show this bad scene to 5 people and each one we feed a banana and one we feed granola, etc. What do we find? That's a terrible example. And so observing new things about the human condition from that kind of work is what they do. And I think it's very important. And I would propose applying the theories that come out of that to the wisdom in motion model. Okay, we've got this new conclusion. I'm trying to think of a recent one, because I see so many. By the way, there's a show called Hidden Brain on NPR that has these every week practically. And of course, I can't come up with one off the top of my head. But one was say about ways to stimulate getting new habits through reducing friction. And there have been studies on that. So an example of that is put on your workout clothes before you go to sleep. And then they study people who try to reduce friction and whether they actually do more of the habit they want. That's an example, but then we could apply that to practices that might come out of it. And how does it relate to all the past bodies of knowledge that, and so does that start to answer the question?
Yeah, stuff. So okay, you've kind of put it on your diagram. You've linked it down to the bottom left, the scientific method kind of part. So that's where the psychology bit is. Okay, so it does fit in. Because what I think I've noticed, yeah, you can come up with models of the mind, what it does, but it doesn't actually. I mean, that's the theory, as you say, but not the practice. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
Thank you, DLJ. Folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to ask questions or make comments. Paul, I'm going to take the privilege here to ask a question.
Sure.
We've studied, Christianity, Taoism, and Hinduism. Can you talk a little bit more about? Let's take Christianity. Where do you see the influence of Christianity in all these thinkers? In what form? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure, Srikant. Thanks for the question. And before I answer it, I want to also stimulate more people to respond. I want to hear from others also about Srikant's question and also how you view therapy in your life. Do you think I'm completely off the wall and there's no connection between any exposure you've had to therapy and this? Or is there a connection that maybe you didn't think as much about, but is there? So to answer Srikant related to that, let me answer it from the point of view of people with a Christian background that I do talk to in my practice and how we talk to each other, if they're open to that. So one of the first things I brought up was this really important principle. Again, Srikant, you've studied so much about the Trinity and the teachings of the early fathers that I'd love to hear your response to see if you think I'm in a good track here or not. But man in God's image and the divine, I don't want to say spark because that's kind of a Gnostic approach, but that this key element of, it's kind of like the Mother Teresa elements, like seeing the divinity in everyone. That is, you could probably, a person who's deep into Christianity can quote the passages from scripture that are directly in sync with Carl Rogers. I'm going one by one down the path here, like the idea that we're on a path to get closer to Jesus, to get closer to God, and the thread of Christianity that talked about methods. I would like to apply the model to say, what were the methods that people, the early church fathers, Jesus, applied to break through the barriers that stop us from being close to God, and relate those to the practices of, for instance, looking at cognitive distortions. Then finally, even though it's not as obvious in the Christian tradition, the need to get silent, the sort of mystical part of the Christian tradition is there And how does getting quiet so that you can really connect relate to Christianity? I'm afraid I've responded to your question with questions, but I hope they stimulate your own thinking, and you can give me your thoughts on what I've said so far.
Oh, thank you, Paul. I find it very interesting. I mean, one is that what you're doing is that you're actually getting something that the person that you're helping already knows and already believes in, already has some experience in, and you're connecting it to modern psychotherapy ideas. So I think that's a very, very powerful way of doing that. So the question I had was like a follow-up question. I mean, and I clearly see, for example, Rogers and Christianity very, very clearly. I see the influence of spirituality in Jung is very, very prominent. And I find even the techniques that you're talking about, okay, what are the kinds of pitfalls that, let's say Christianity talks about, or Hinduism talks about, of attachment and things like that. I can see it translating very easily into psychotherapy. So this is very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Srikant. And I want to mention a couple things that some people consider this dangerous terrain, and really don't endorse the blending of these things. I'm curious if anyone here finds what I'm saying problematic in that way, and if so, why? And also comments on the medical model. And am I correct that people see therapy as a treatment for a problem a person has? Because I see that as an issue that I want to change, but if it's a false issue, then I don't need to change it. And everyone already knows that therapies could be used by, like my partner Tanya and I use it, to just bring yourself further on the path wherever you are. If you're in suicidal mode, it brings you further on the path. If you're struggling with a neurotic tendency or a given phobia, they're helping you on the path. And if you feel very balanced and you're just looking for a way to be more complete, they're helping you there too. Do people agree with that? And what ways do you use to find your way if you don't use these methods?
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is JP, followed by Sam Yu. JP.
Hi, Paul. I was not ready to answer the question you just posed. I do like how you progressed through the history of different terms and uses in psychology. I want to take it back to William James, if I may. Varieties of Religious Experience, where he basically suggests that it's impossible for us to all share a religious experience. It's basically individual religious experiences. When a multiple of people have it similar enough, they will create a religion, almost Nietzschean on this. But if that's the case, and William James then goes on to talk about how we need to find the pragmatic way of understanding the individual, not by little pieces of what's going on, but understanding the whole structure of what a person's living through the environment, and use that to I help the person. I'm wondering if you would comment on how you chose the humanistic value over the analytic or the psychoanalyst. If that question is even clearer, I hope it was.
Yeah, I think, let me ask you to repeat or rephrase one. I want to see if I understand where you're coming from, which is a thinking that the ideas of William James were more amenable to lead down the path that ended in the tradition of psychoanalysis or in the Jungian tradition, analytical psychology? Elaborate on that, just so I understand, if that's what you're saying.
My viewpoint is everybody's gone from William James, who has taken it from previous philosophies. James, to me, was trying to make it all pragmatic, find a way to make it work. And I think that was a good thing Freud did by trying a way to find associations and dreams and discussions with people to find out how to make this work with Jungian archetypes, all this similarity and synchronicities. But the humanism tries to put us together in a sense of we are all human, the Homo sapien, as you said, we're aware of being aware, so that's something. But if there's a religious experience, I don't want to overbear on this question, but if the religious experience is individual, and so in a pragmatic way, we need to work with the individual. I'm going all over the place now. Sorry. Working with the individual, an individual has their own religious experience, whether it's Lao Tzu trying to explain with the Taoists, whether it's whoever wrote the back of the Gita, or whoever started putting the different gospels together and such. Everybody's still explaining their own individual experience. When we start putting together religions, we have a bunch of gospels that really don't even always go together. They contradict each other. We get the Mahabharata that has contradictory stories. And this goes on through all religions and cultures. Trying to put that together to make it work. If we have one system that's supposed to work for everybody, this one system, each individual system is almost creating the structure that people have to work in and live in. And it's kind of controlling the imagination and thoughts. I mean, James brings everything down to the stream of consciousness, the habit, the emotions, and will, going for 4 different aspects as to what can be used to try to work with people. But you had done a good progression, I thought, through the history as to how they developed, and then you had chosen the humanism over the others. So understanding that it's all still going to be a personal experience in the environment.
Love it.
Many structured environment. You're then going that way. I was just wondering how you chose to go towards the humanism, but not take up a different approach. I hope I'm not getting more unclear.
I love the question. And I'm going to go in the spirit of the model I proposed and basically collaborate with you on possible answers to the bigger questions while answering the personal question, why I chose that. I should have said more at the beginning that there's huge benefit to be gained by doing the same tracing from the wisdom teachings, first down through Freud, and then also down through Jung, into psychoanalysis and analytical psychology. So me not choosing to focus on that does not say that I don't value it. The reason I didn't choose it is twofold. One is that it's kind of strange, JP, but that tradition is not in the mainstream. Again, people can disagree with me, but the things that people are getting exposed to in the world today, the vast majority, not all, we can look at the statistics together, but you don't find the vast majority of people getting psychoanalysis or analytical psychology, depth psychology. You can give a whole bunch of reasons for that, like money and the length of time it takes to do those things, and say that it has nothing to do with their effectiveness because they are effective. But the fact remains, I want to look at the things that people are getting exposed to and see if we can get the most possible value out of them. And I do, and the second part of the thing is purely practical, which is that's what I do. That's when you get a master's in mental health counseling these days, you'd be surprised at how little effort Freud is. I'm sorry, but it's just brushed by quickly. Jung is brushed by even less quickly. All the main training is in establishing rapport, learning how to match, getting a good, strong connection, because the studies show that rapport, which is Rogerian idea, is the most important. And then how do you use cognitive behavioral therapy? What are the way you teach the skills? And those who've been through the same program can tell me if they agree. So I hope I'm answering that part of your question, JP, that it's both practical. This is what I know. I would be crazy to try to tell you about that thread down through Freud. And I would give him a very bad name because I think of guys like Jordan Peterson who say, well, Freud just decided that all of religion is just this, putting your father figure in your mind up in heaven. He really kind of trashes him in one of his talks. I can't say I agree or disagree with that because I'm ignorant. And even my knowledge of Jung is not extensive enough. I have not done analytical psychology with people, but I see enough similarities that, for instance, to your point, although there's this humanistic vibe of everyone, the namaste, the divine in everyone, it comes down to an individual practice. And also that, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Also the wisdom, the model I proposed, you can map down to an individual. What theories everyone has to decide on what basis they're going to act in the world. So what is my basis? What is the theory behind it? What are the practices I do personally? What is my validation method? They say in nutrition, N equals 1. I'm a study of myself. I would say to my words, if your name's JP, you become a JP-ologist. You're studying yourself. So I'm letting you know there's huge room for individual exploration, and it's critical. And I want to see a reflection in the study, in the humanistic traditions I talked about, and I want to loop it back to Jung, for instance. I could imagine an application of modern practices and theories and validation methods to the way Jung did dream analysis to make that wisdom teaching of his teaching of that come alive, and be integrated with these humanistic traditions. We go into this angry science mode where there's, even your question sort of implies it. This is better than that. Why, I don't mean that you're that way, but that's what I'm trying to get us out. You aren't that way at all. Okay, I better stop there because I said a lot, and maybe you should have a chance to say how you're responding to what I'm saying, JP, if that's okay, Shrikant.
Go ahead, please.
That was good, Paul. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, JP. Love it that you're here. One of my poetry colleagues and on a lot of the other meetups.
Next up is Sam Yu.
Hey all. Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Paul. Really, really informative. And I was just thinking as you were doing, did you call her Tamara? Was that the example?
I actually called her Tamara.
Tamara, okay. Well, her day in the life, I was thinking, wow, I could really use some of these skills. But what was coming to mind a lot when you were speaking, and forgive me if it's a little bit off topic, is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the emphasis on it being a spiritual malady. And there's actually some in the AA Big Book, in the text, there's actually some back and forth. There's a correspondence with Carl Jung, and in that correspondence, he's directing the patient to look outside of himself and to go to where there is religion. And it just really, I guess, more of a statement. It just really strikes me that is an approach that will work. A power greater than oneself. And yeah, that it had me thinking about that while you were speaking. If there's anything on that you want to comment on.
Thank you, Sam. Again, let the world know this is an excellent poet who's speaking to us. And before I leave that subject, the things we do together on Monday night in 52 Living Ideas are part of this integration of all of the parts of human consciousness as methods of learning. So we write collaborative poetry on Monday nights, which isn't reading a deep philosophical text. It's a whole different use of the brain, and Sam's involved in that. But the AA thing is great to bring up, Sam. I think one of the reasons AA works is, I was reading in preparation for this, like, well, what do the people like? in the world, in the West at least, because it's hard for me to get the data on worldwide, but in America, for instance, what is their spiritual orientation? Is it zero? Is it mostly atheist? What is it? And about 80%, the latest data I saw say about 80% of Americans consider that they believe in some, I hate to say God, but a force that is larger than themselves operating in the universe. And the reason I bring that up is it seems almost, if you think that way, it seems almost negligent to not make the connections I'm making. Because if we keep it compartmentalized like this, we are ignoring a pretty important aspect of someone's personality. And the other thing I want to bring up about this is, let's take this idea of the atheist, even though that's not the majority. And I have huge respect for all faiths. I will call atheism a faith and make them really mad. But everyone, no matter what their frame is, has to decide how they're going to act every day. That's part of the principle at the bottom of this humanistic is, in spite of what some materialistic or physical or philosophical arguments might say, we all have this sense that we have choices and we have to base our choices on something. And AA found it necessary. And so people who do not say they believe in God still find AA useful. Now, there is a group that goes, oh, I can't take that stuff. They talk about God. But there's another group that goes, I don't know what to think about God, but this helped me stay clean. So Sam, I hope I'm at least reflecting on your question with you. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, thanks.
All right, it's a good time to talk now. Give any comments that you have. What do you think of Paul's presentation? How does it compare with what you know about psychotherapy? Do you think that integration of spirituality into psychotherapy is a good thing, or it's a dangerous thing? Or any comments that you have are welcome. So go ahead. You can either raise your hand in Zoom or type an exclamation mark. And Paul, you're welcome to. You're welcome to ask kind of questions of people as well. So wait a minute. I have JP. JP, go ahead.
Hi, Shakran. I don't have a question. I was just going to point out there are several hands already raised. And
oh, really? Oh,
they're waiting to be.
Yeah, I wanted to say the same thing.
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. My mistake. I'm working on my. Oh, sorry. I'm working on my phone and I didn't notice it. Let's go with. Apologize, folks. Next up is going to be Donna, Bill, and Matthew.
Okay, so it kind of responds to what Shrikant just said. So I don't have any narrative. I'm not connecting the dots, but I have stuff like spaghetti at the wall. I think it's connected. But I think that wisdom and mental health processes are connected. And that's my own experience has been that trajectory. And it's been from religion to wisdom, et cetera, mental health, et cetera. And I worked in the field. So in various capacities. So I think that the downregulation of the vagal nerve has a lot to do with why we want wisdom. So instead of doing the fight, flight, faint, fawn, and I forget what the fifth one is, but there's a whole bunch of F's now. It's not just fight and flight. As a automatic nervous system reaction to stress or fear, trying to get our frontal lobe, I used to call it, prefrontal cortex, engaged. So think. So not just react, not just have all these feelings and not be dysfunctional. Let's get functional. And wisdom from ages, forward was about how to live in this world, right? How to survive, with various ideas about what that meant. So I think it's all connected, and counselors, often mental health workers, etc., try to get people to have more of a comfortable life, a functional life, less traumatic, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of it has to do with down regulating the vagal nerve and using more of your frontal lobe and developing that. That's it.
Thank you so much, Donna. I'm so glad you brought the vagal nerve up and these ideas up, because you're prompting me to say something I meant to say that I haven't yet, which is, I believe your discussion of the vagal nerve is, you might even be call it the fourth wave. So, and I want to do a shout out forwardly to Aiden, I think it is, who's going to be doing a set of meetups, because at the forefront of the newest thoughts on how to help people regulate is not only the vagal nerve, but a set of other practices often focused on trauma. I'd like you to respond to this as well, Donna, and Aiden's going to cover them. So think of Aiden as doing presentations that follow from this on the fourth wave focused on trauma, because I think that's what's going to happen. Any more you'd like to say about that, Donna? The idea of this being a fourth wave, your points?
Yeah, I agree. It's already a fourth wave, I think. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Indeed, Aiden is going to do this whole series on trauma and different therapies that are based on that idea. Next up is going to be Bill, followed by, I think, Matthew. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks, Paul, for that great presentation. I want to pick up on the story of Tamara's day. And that was great. It was so visceral. It was so like non-theoretical and non-scientific. It was just an immersive, like we were all tagging along on tomorrow's day and almost viscerally, imagining ourselves doing the same thing. That was just a real shift in mood and mode. And it reminded me of this principle in Buddhism called antidotes. It was almost like tomorrow's day was just a list of the right antidote at each moment of her day for what was happening. And I imagine Tamara, practicing this way in her spiritual practice for years, would learn exactly what the right antidote is for each situation. And she might even, like map it out in writing in a notebook or a journal or something. And then once she got the perfect antidote list, she might even wind up memorizing it so that she wouldn't even, need to go to the notebook to know which antidote to use in each moment. And not just antidotes from Buddhist practice, and all the different kinds of antidotes that you just mentioned. And now a new agey person might call that like set of lessons learned and memorized about which antidote to apply to which situation. It might just call that part of the mind, the inner higher self, or the inner intuitive God. A religious person might call that part of the mind in which is stored those learned lessons and memorized lessons about the antidote, quote, God's will for me in each moment, unquote. It kind of doesn't matter which label you use, though. Inner intuitive God, God's will for me, whatever, my higher power's will for me. Like the labels and the terminology are irrelevant. The question is whether the antidotes are the right antidotes, whether each antidote is the right antidote for each moment in the day. And that, coming up with that right antidote list is a journey of self-mapping with an N of one. I love that idea of N of one. So thanks for listening, and I'll pass.
Great, Bill. I really appreciate your comments, because you bring a lot of knowledge to these meetups and discussions we've had in the past. Srikant, can I ask Bill a question? and let him
Absolutely.
explore a little longer?
Absolutely. It's up to
Okay.
Bill whether he wants to answer it,
Okay,
though.
so Bill, I view you as having some very deep, and others here, deep knowledge of Buddhist practice. And I hope I'm not misrepresenting you there, but you talk a lot about it and you seem to know a lot about it. So my question is, does the idea that we can take modern theory of the type I talked about and actually enliven, like, I hate to use the word improve upon, but keep alive the Buddhist tradition rather than being contradictory or positioned as something different than it, that it actually is a living system. So Buddhism evolves with it. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, that's a great prompt for an answer from me. I'll try to be brief. Okay, number one, first of all, I'm not steeped in Buddhist texts. I'm more in the Zen Buddhist tradition, which is just about doing the practice of labeling your thoughts and being self-aware for years and just doing the practice instead of studying, Buddhist scriptures about it. But with that preliminary aside, I will say this. I've read articles in like Tricycle magazine, which is a big Buddhist magazine in America, in which they distinguish between, the authors distinguish between American Buddhism and Asian Buddhism, and how American Buddhism is much more informed by the psychology of becoming aware of one's own issues and one's own buttons, and looking in the buttons that get pushed, and looking into the truth of the emotional truth of one's own childhood and teenage years, and one's relationships with one's parents in those years, and how that shaped one's buttons that get pushed in adulthood, and how American Buddhists are much more open to that and much more into integrating that. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second and last thing I would say is that if anyone's looking to do the end of one study within themselves a little deeper and access the roadmap to the human mind and body and spirit that have been produced in the wisdom tradition that kind of are reflected also in 21st century psychology, the place to go in Buddhism is the 12 links of dependent origination and the 12 links of transcendental arising. And if you just Google those phrases, I'll put them in the chat. That gets you to the Buddhist roadmap. And then if you look at the chakras, like the 7 chakras and the chakra blocks, that gets you to that ancient wisdom tradition's roadmap. And then if you look at 21st and 20th century psychology, they've got their roadmaps. And it turns out those roadmaps pretty much are reconcilable and consistent and almost the same at a certain level. So anyone who wants to integrate these wisdom traditions with 20th and 21st century psychology and self-mapping of one's own inner life, there's plenty of material to work with. So thanks for listening and thanks for the question, and I'll pass.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was a great, that's what I hoped for from you, and you provided it. I think I was very interested in the difference between the Asian response to these ideas of looking back into childhood compared to American, and it opens that whole question, which relates to JP's point earlier of where the unconscious sits in the wisdom teachings. Like, what is its place compared to how it's looked at in all these other traditions? And it's a great topic.
I have one very brief, less than 30 seconds addition that capsulizes all of this. I once had a Buddhist meditation teacher who had robes. He was a Zen Buddhist monk, okay, as well as steeped in 20th, 21st century psychology. And he summarized all that I just said in a single line. You have to have a self before you can transcend yourself.
Beautiful. I think you've told us that one before. Thank you for reminding us of that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Next up is going to be Matthew, followed by Gerard. Matthew.
Well, I really appreciate this discussion, coming from a therapist too. I've had, I'd say, very mixed results, sometimes not good results with therapy over the years. And when I found someone that I, probably leans more on the spiritual aspects, it was truly like eye-opening. For the first time, I really, really made great strides through that, you know, really kind of counteracting a lot of, I'd say the self-identification, always trying to figure out what's wrong with you approach in recent years. So some of the stuff that you talked about just really hit home. And I think it's difficult for therapists, counselors, and psychiatrists to really get into this and what people really need, because in many states, going there could potentially risk their license. And it's, you know, I really hope as we go forward, there's a more open perspective on a lot of this, you know, like I understand it's really insurance driven, that really runs the game. But, you know, if insurance companies are really focused on lowering the costs for the insurance providers, they would be more allowable, I believe, in bringing in some of this more personalized spirituality aspects. So I'm going to embarrass her, but Jessica Burke is on this call too, and she's studying similar perspective for a doctorate now. And we were talking about it, and she's like, you know, you want to go more to that coach rather than a therapist perspective, because it allows you the flexibility to really focus on problem solving and unlocking some of your clients, I guess, deep-seated perspectives on certain things, rather than taking a clinical approach of, I'm here to diagnose you and then basically listen to you and potentially, you know, prescribe you drugs, but not really focus on the core actions to really move forward, because the law doesn't necessarily allow me to. So, you know, that's just my perspective, but I really appreciated the presentation and the discussion, and from someone that went to a, I'd say, more liberal Catholic school where we learned about Buddhism and world religions, and we did yoga and stuff like that. I've seen where not sitting in that single frame of reference is very beneficial, and I appreciate being able to attend a presentation like this.
Thank you so much, Matt. Same thing. Can I ask you a question or two?
Yeah, of course.
The form of therapy you had that had a link to spirituality, was it one of the ones I talked about it, or was it more focused like with a spiritual counselor that was sort of a Christian counselor, for instance? What was it? You don't have to answer because that's disclosing something personal about you. So I understand if you don't want to answer, but I would be interested.
Yeah, I'm not a Christian counselor. I think he more operates as like a coach, I would say.
I see.
Yeah. But,
okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say more like a coach. Like, you know, he's he's made the comment before, like, please don't turn me in to the state, sort of thing, because we've gone certain places that had to be gone to, but are kind of off limits, I think, in the rigid therapeutical framework.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think this is a really important point, and I want to say a few things about it. One is, I couldn't have taken my first career. I'm an old guy, and I did a whole nother career unrelated to counseling for 25 years. I mean, but if I had tried to go into counseling as a young person, I wouldn't have survived. And my point is, the third wave hadn't happened yet at that time, or it wasn't fully developed. So here's my message, Matthew, that my message of hope. I can sit with a client today, and I can ask that client to go and sit and try and become one with the tree, and then go home that night and pray according to their tradition, a gratitude practice and thankfulness and set an intention to become closer to God. And I can call all of those in the realm of either distress tolerance, emotional regulation, mindfulness. I'm not cheating either. That's what I mean. The modern therapies are breaking the mold that you're worried about, in my opinion. And the fourth wave that Donna referred to is getting even closer, although that isn't all covered by insurance yet. But Aidan will talk more about that. So I want to give a sense of hope to that. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Next up is going to be, I think, Peter, followed by Zarar. Peter. Peter, you're muted.
Okay, hopefully I'm not muted now.
That's correct.
I am from sunny downtown Australia, and I work professionally as, well, amongst other things, a mental health advocate within Australia at a national level and a care peer worker. So I work in mental health, drug and alcohol. I have for a long time come to an understanding of all health, not just mental health. I just take the mental off and just say all health has a spiritual component. And I draw that from a couple of places, and I'm going to go back. I may have already been used in the presentation before, and I apologize if it was. But Plato was one of the earlier people who said, if you treat the body without attending to the spirit, you have done an incomplete thing. And so I've thought that was always a very wise thing. When people come across mental ill health, and I look at people's recovery paths, I see two things. That if people see what's happening to them as an opportunity to explore and get better and have a better life, then they will experience a more positive recovery path. If they see what's happening to them as a disaster, then they will have a different response. So just wondering, Paul, thank you for your presentation. And I was wondering if you could comment on the spirituality and meaning in health, and where you see those two things fitting in.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear you talk about how you view that, and you referenced a few examples. I actually didn't mention Plato, but I did mention the Stoics and Albert Ellis's influence, the Stoics influencing Albert Ellis. But I think the general point is important, and also part the studies, back to I think DLJ's question about, well, how does the psychologist fit into this? The studies psychologists are doing about one's faith in outcomes compared to the medical outcome is really interesting right now. So I think I'm reinforcing what you're saying and my strong agreement with you by saying we now, with our current validation model, are applying it to the question of, if 10 people have the same procedure with the exact same base symptoms, and 5 have an attitude that's more along the lines you're talking about, that there's meaning in their life and they have a foundation in spirituality, that they will have a higher probability of having a successful outcome. So I'm seeing the new validation models being applied to test what you're talking about, and the tests are yielding the importance of it. So
well,
I'll leave it. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I had the opportunity to meet with Marsha Linehan a few years ago, as I actually care for someone who travels in life with personality disorder, and I wanted some guidance from her as how to best give for her and give the best chance of her own recovery. So I really got, when you talked about the third wave and mentioned Marsha Linehan, I was really, really encouraged. So thank you so much.
Love your comments. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Next up is Zerar. Zerar, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks again, Paul, for the presentation. It was nice how you kind of integrated everything and also kind of went step by step. I had, I guess, Mike, it was kind of a comment and then a question for you about, I guess, sometimes the, I guess, differences between spirituality and, say, some of the other arms that you spoke about, like rationality, can be somewhat weird. And I was wondering what you thought about it. So one thing I was thinking about is this book I read, I think it was by Michael Platt, about Confucius and as if rituals. And also I'm thinking about How God Becomes Real by Tanya Luberman. But in the as if rituals, he talks about Confucius like has these different rituals. Like an example is like you consecrate a house because a house has evil spirits. So you like, I think it was you put like a spit of meat up on a grill and the nice smells will kind of convert the bad spirits into ancestors. And then he comments about how, or at least according to this author, that it's irrelevant whether it's real or not. But the point is, I guess, like how it kind of affects you and it transforms you, that's relevant. Because what's most relevant is kind of your behavior. But that might be true, but at the same time, it's weird that you kind of have to do some of these, like, I guess what would seem to us non-rational behaviors, but they seem kind of necessary in order to have this transformative effect. The one thing I was going to add to that is someone from a previous meeting, I think here, I forget who it was an anthropologist. She mentioned how religious experiences related to stability and spirituality related to transformation. And so I wonder if that's linked here too, that these spiritual experiences are more about transformation, and hence they kind of don't make sense, like in any logical way. But anyway, I was wondering what you thought about that tension, I guess, that and whether it occurs in your practice and what you think of it.
Wow. That's so much. That's great. I have to pick. I think I'll just respond in the order that things are coming into my mind. One is a note, and this is a shout out to what Srikant has put together. I get a lot of my understanding in a contemporary sense of the wisdom teachings from 52 Living Ideas. So for instance, we are reading the Analects, Confucius Analects, on Tuesday nights, every Tuesday at 8 o'clock, tune in. And in those, we just finished the second half of the Tao Te Ching, and now we're going to do the Analects, and people are translating it. But my point is, it's part of that living wisdom that I was talking about. So I'm addressing your first point about Confucius and rituals, and also related to the Tao, like they're still translating it and deciding what words mean and how to interpret them, which testifies to its relevance. So I'm agreeing with you and with those who, if you look at the rituals that Confucius was stressing, we just went through a story, the last one, about he had this importance of, because he got a gift, how to return the favor of the gift, but he didn't want to do the favor for the guy. But each of us has had a chance to think about favors and how they mean something's attached to them. So there's a universality to it that way transcends the specific ritual. So I just want to mention, this is the living system of the wisdom teachings. This is the Analects right now alive. And that model I talked about, applying a contemporary theory and practice to that set of ideals, is hugely fruitful. And we do it here in 52 Living Ideas. Secondly, the Tao especially invites one to just drop rationality. And I agree with you and those who talk about it that it's hugely important. And I think it gets to, if you go to modern, there it is in the Tao, ancient. If you go to modern, you get the importance of a guy like, Srikant will help me, the guy who wrote Master and the Emissary. I forget his name, help me.
Ian McGilchrist.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ian McGilchrist. So here he's going, look, this left brain, this cognitive approach, it's just a bad master. You need to just drop it and have the integration and really be controlled by the intuitive, and then the rational process you're talking about becomes the emissary. And I'm just echoing what you're saying, and that it's necessary for transformation, that it's part of human health. It goes all the way back to the wisdom teachings and right back to the present. Does that help? What are your comments on everything I'm saying? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the relation to the Tao makes sense. I guess the Taoist text, like the Zhuangzi, doesn't really answer any of these things in the sense that it's very rational the way it's written, although it advocates for dropping rationality, which doesn't make sense because it's written in a very rational way. Yet it's, but yeah, but I guess the Zhuangzi just. I guess that's what the as if ritual itself is. You just do it as if it's real, and it's not really. I guess it's not really wrong. But I think there is this tension, especially like generally. I don't know. I feel the tension, but then usually when I talk to people, they don't, seem to care if I have outlandish ideas. But yeah. But I think yeah. But you hear some people say it, like with Alcoholics Anonymous, they might scoff at that people believe in God, but yeah. So anyway, I was just bringing it up as sometimes I think there's a tension.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next up is Donna, followed by Bill. Donna.
Okay, so there was more that I was thinking that I didn't say, and it's connected to what's been said, is that there's a thing about emotional safety that we go to counselors for, or friends, or whatever, or priests, or whatever. So I just want to say, I started with indoctrinated religion and pulling out all the wisdom from that. I went to Catholic school, and I pulled the wisdom from the wisdom books in the Bible, and any other stuff. But and had to go beyond that to really find out how to live life in the real world, in the big world, and also solve problems. And as the Jungian, I guess as Carl Jung had said, we don't, I'm gonna hopefully not mess this up, but just that we don't usually go to depths, we don't usually go deeper unless we have a painful experience. So that's pertinent with this thing too. But the emotional safety thing, I think a lot of religions do that. I think a lot of spirituality, we have to feel, people seek to feel emotionally safe. And so lots of times churches, religion, wisdom, whatever, that's where we go when we're able. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about a lot of spirituality. Also, that some people feel safe, I learned, some people feel safe and want to talk about spirituality and whatever that means to them. And whatever language they need to go there, they want to go, and that will help them feel safe. And some people do not, and that will help them feel safe. So it depends on the exact person. And I think that the thing that ties a lot of it together to me is the caring issue, the heart. People seek safety, emotional safety. They seek connection. They in relationship. So I think there's a connection there with churches, spirituality, counselors, mental health, whatever. People seek that, and that's our healing. That enables healing. And then if we can go deeper than that, that's ideal. That's what we want.
Thank you, Donna, bringing up emotional safety. I really appreciate. And I want to propose another angle on this question of, do we incorporate spirituality into therapy that you might be offering at just a clinic where anyone could be walking in there? And how does that relate to safety? But it's table stakes, back to Rogers, to provide that sense of connection and safety from the moment a person walks in the door. And I would, maybe it's a bit radical, but I would say, if they never mention anything about religion or spirit, and you never mention it, and I never mention it as a therapist, if we are allowing them to get beyond emotional blocks, distortions, dysregulation, it doesn't matter if we talk about being on a path toward transcendence or deeper knowledge or spiritual discovery. We're facilitating it without saying a word about it. So thanks for the thumbs up. Okay.
Thank you. Next up is Bill.
Thanks. I want to pick up on what Zarar Shahzad mentioned in his discussion of the rational versus the beyond rational, and perhaps connected to what I think it was Donna was talking about, emotional safety. So to do it, I'll just put on the table as food for thought an analogy or two, picking up on Zarar's comment where he was referring to these studies that show, you know, people do a certain practice and it has a certain beneficial effect on their emotions or whatever. And I think Zarar's words were, it doesn't matter if it's true, it just matters if you believe it, this spiritual practice you do. So the analogy here is traffic lights. Like, there's no way to prove in a physics lab or a chemistry lab that green means go and red means stop, because there's nothing about those colors that require them to mean those things. But if you believe green means go and red means stop, you know, it makes a good traffic system when everyone in the city believes that. And if you believe the opposite of what everyone else believes, you'll have a car accident and wind up in the hospital, you know, an x-ray showing your leg's broken. So, you know, that's you give that a little thought there, okay? And then line it up with the next analogy, which is, you know, the cell phone traffic navigator that's you know, on people's dashboards, where the driver says, "Hey Siri, I need to go to 4th and Elm. Tell me which turns to make." And Siri says back in a voice, "Oh, turn right at the next light, turn left at the next on-ramp up to the 405 or whatever, et cetera, et cetera." And then suppose in the passenger seat is the driver's friend who's a hardcore atheist. And the friend says to the driver, "Hey man, you're doing what that voice is telling you, even though there's no human being on the other side of that cell phone traffic navigator speaking into a microphone. You're being irrational." And the driver says, "No, chill out, man. It's just a metaphor. They just need to translate it into a voice to make it easy to understand, so I don't have to look down at my cell phone traffic navigator." Okay, now imagine the driver has right next to that on their dashboard another navigator that's their spiritual navigator, in which is stored all the lessons they've learned about which antidotes to apply at each time in their day, going back to that previous Tamara story. And all the driver in the car or any time in their day needs to do is say to the spiritual navigator, "Okay, I'm in this situation. Remind me what lessons I learned about which antidotes to supply." Okay. You know, to practice in that moment, and the spiritual navigator speaks back in words, right? Okay, so, you know, and then the final analogy is like these robot automaton therapists who there's no human being in the therapist's body. It's just like a robot, but they'll listen empathetically and respond appropriately. It's like maybe people could feel better with that. Okay. So from this perspective, like praying to a God who you assume is listening and you feel heard, and you might even feel some intuitive guidance coming back from your own unconscious intuitive guide that sounds like God's will for you. There's nothing unscientific or about that. If it works, it works, you know? So this is getting beyond the supernatural. This is my final point. This is getting beyond a definition of God as supernatural and anthropomorphic to a God with a different definition as just a little location in the unconscious that stores up lessons learned and feeds back the solutions and the antidotes when you need them, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I see DLJ nodding. It's like, let's break down these conventional definitions and get down to the science of what works and what doesn't, including N=1 science, which is a very first-person science where you can't show your data to any other scientist, but if it works for you, you know it. You know that if you say do a certain practice and it gives you a catharsis and a relaxation response, you can feel it. So, okay, those are the analogies I just wanted to put on the table when we talk about the rational and the beyond rational. It turns out the beyond rational has plenty of rationality to it. So thanks for listening.
I love these, Bill. I mean, the equation of Siri or the GPS talking with the inner small voice of spirit is so great. There's just a lot to be considered from that. So, you know, actually, this is just a side, and Tanya will laugh about this, but sometimes I'm driving with the GPS on and it's saying do this, and I have this intuitive sense that I shouldn't do that. So the exact two things collide, and I think that this whole question of which is rational, what's more rational to be your guidepost is just huge. Love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Next up is Zerar, followed by Mona. Zerar.
Yeah, actually, after I spoke, I realized something right afterwards. But also, yeah, thanks, Bill, for the GPS metaphor is nice, especially because of the metaphor of what the GPS means. Um, yeah, I think one thing I was looking for is there is this tension sometimes between spirituality and rationality. But I guess one way that you look for it, like you look for how it's good or not, is through actions. And I guess usually in uh, uh, like in most settings, most medical settings, you can tell the difference of when something's gone wrong. Usually, like people might have pressured speech or other sorts of symptoms. I think one thing I've noticed sometimes is when people, when things are problematic, either if something is too spiritual or not spiritual enough, there's something, my background's in psychology, so we often talk about reifying problems. So I guess one way to think about reifying problems is, when you refer to God, you don't think of all that it could mean. You assume the words you use, and that's one way to interpret reifying, is that you put way too much emphasis on the words that you're using without kind of letting go to all the nonverbal information that contributes to that. Um, but yeah, so anyway, this is more of a comment from my own thing of how would you know about how to resolve the tension between rationality and reason. I guess you kind of know it through these other means that you can look for. But the one thing I was going to put up, though, going back to my main point about this tension, there's this, I forgot, it was some article somewhere about this woman in India who had schizophrenia. And as you may know, in other countries outside of America, they may not view voices people hear as being crazy thoughts. They might interpret them as spirits. And so usually in other countries, it's, I think, been shown, like in India and Africa, that, people with schizophrenia have better outcomes. But in this particular woman's case, her daughter was like, she's not well. She doesn't bathe herself. She doesn't do all these things. And I think she was having trouble like getting her help because people were just like, oh, it's just natural. She's kind of hearing these kinds of spirits. And so I guess it was interesting because I guess there was a tension again. I don't know why I'm obsessed with this tension right now, but anyway, I'm bringing it up again.
Thank you. You're in some very deep water with schizophrenia, and what kind of voices are those, and how do we respond to those from various traditions? Huge. Another whole night to talk about that. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up is Mona.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, for the presentation. This was great. I was thinking about it from the perspective of how do we quantify the results? Like a therapist in a therapy setting, you think of outcomes like reduction of symptoms, right? In a spiritual world, how do you measure the results? That was a question that I asked my spiritual teacher. And then the answer was, well, there is no way to say how far along you are or whether it works or not. But here is the question. Are you becoming more compassionate? Can you relate and have empathy for others? So there is a whole set of other ways of looking at what is progress in a spiritual world. And incidentally, I think that the removal of symptoms is a byproduct of that, but not the main goal. Like the main goal of a spiritual sort of practice is not necessarily self-improvement. Not at all, actually. And I mean, I doubt, I mean, sometimes these lines are murky. Like there's a fine line between the mystic and the psychotic. How do you know? How do you know? So I am, yeah, I'm contemplating.
Thank you, Mona. I really appreciate all of the contributions you make at these meetups, and that one, because going back to the Analects, this came up just the other night because somebody asked Confucius, one of his students, that's how that book works, is what is, I think Ren was the word that they don't like translating it because it's tricky to translate, but instead of giving a definition, Confucius did what he always does, which is describe how a person might act who had Ren. So that's a whole different validation model. It's not the scientific method. It's a whole different approach you're hinting at. And it's really important to decide what is our validation model and what does success mean? So that's the questions you're raising, and I can't answer them in 1 minute, but I love that you're raising them, and I'd love to collaborate on answering them because that's what the whole thing is about. And looking back at how the wisdom teachings answered that. Thanks, Mona.
Thank you, Mona. Paul, so it is coming up on 10 o'clock. Would you like to make any closing remarks? Firstly, I love this and would love it if you want to kind of do a follow-up, in a month or so. That would be wonderful. But do you have anything more, any kind of closing statements you'd like to make? Things that you would like people to explore for the future? Anything that you want to say?
Yeah, first, thank you. I got what I hoped for and more from this night because I really didn't know how people would respond. And Srikant's point that when you do a presentation, you learn as much as the people that you're talking to just by saying the words, because when they come out of your mouth, saying them to someone, they've suddenly got a new angle and a weight that's occurring to you even as you say them. So I think looking at the point of view, a lot of the things that ended with what Mona said about how do we decide what our goal is and how do we validate whether we're getting there, that really stimulates my mind. So maybe I'll think more about that and talk to you about a follow-up along those lines, Srikant. There's my closing thoughts, but there's so many notes and ideas in here that's just how I can scratch the surface at the end of our time. Thank you so much, everyone.
No, that's wonderful, Paul. And Paul, I mean, it's just the richness of your preparation and just the richness of the perspective that you have and the way in which you engage with people. I think that's wonderful. And what happens is that it's really, I mean, that's the thing I love about these meetups, is that even the person who is presenting, and especially the person who is presenting, actually is faced with lots of interesting questions from all kinds of angles that they had not thought of. So it was wonderful. We launched this series on heroes. What is a hero? By David Bloom. And the conversation was amazing. And I was floored by just the sheer breadth and variety of thoughts people had about the concept of hero. And I think this area that you're exploring, I think, has the same kind of potential. So I would be honored if you want to do this on a regular basis.
Thank you, Srikant, so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. We will see you soon. Bye, everybody.